last set of the day, which is a talk, a conversation with two authors, and Celia, a storyteller, and John Arno, a poet. Celia Barker-Lottridge and John Arno Lawson, welcome to our Storytelling Festival. And we are so eager to hear you talk about your book, John Arno, about But It's So Silly, and the power of words and language games and nonsense. So let's put our hands together for Celia and for John Arno Lawson.
Well, it's nice to be here. Unfortunately, I can't see anybody. Well, I can see a few people over here. It's just the light is in my eyes, so I just have to believe that all the people are there. And that's, but to me, that's part of the brilliance of storytelling. When you tell stories or you say rhymes, you say them, for the people that are there, maybe just one person, maybe many people, but you're also doing it for yourself. And, we're going to talk about, especially about, I think we'd call folk rhymes, the rhymes that just occur in the world. And I spent a lot of my life thinking about these rhymes because I was, as you were just told, I was one of the people that started the Parent Child Mother Goose program. And we did it because we thought those words, the words that you say to a small child, a baby, they say so much. They connect you to the child, and they give the child a sense of language and of imagination. These little rhymes are so important. And we started with this faith, and I've never lost it. We those of us that have worked in the program, and there are, I think, other people here who have worked in the program, it's still going. It's 40 years old, which you should all cheer. Because really, to start a program with two people who went out seeking funding, which is what we did to start with, we had to go looking for funding, looking for a place to do it, and to have that last for 40 years and also be done all over the country, not just in Toronto, but there are Parent-Child Mother Goose programs in many of the provinces. So I do believe in the power of rhyme. And I know that John Arno does, since that's what he does with his life. It has to do with the power of rhyme, yes?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, very similar to what you've been doing for much longer. And I know this, I saw this book on the table as well, but this is one of the books Celia wrote. It's quite beautiful. And it's interesting, there's a lot of overlap between what we've done. And one of the things I found interesting about this book was how you took rhymes from other cultures and translated them into English, and then sometimes not only that, but took the rhyme you translated and turned it into a story.
Yes, I know, it's wonderful. Yeah, and it also shows you how much is in a rhyme. You just take a four-line rhyme, but if you think about it, it can have a whole story in it. And for a child, since we're talking about things you do with children, for a child, I don't think there's any difference between a rhyme and a story, because they know, that if the rhyme is about, a dog, they follow the dog in the story, or there's a rhyme that starts out, there is a cobbler on our street mending shoes for little feet with a bang, with a bang, with a bang, 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 with a bang, with a bang, with a bang, bang, bang. Well, there was a girl in a program that I worked in, and she was 3, I think, and that rhyme, she just adored it, and she wanted to do it every time she came to the Mother Goose program. That was the one she wanted to start with. And well, we found out later that she was a little girl who was raised with a group of older cousins, most of whom were boys. And so she had to be a strong girl, she had to be able to resist the physicalness of her. I mean, she wasn't mistreated or anything, but they were just big and strong, and she was not. And so this saying, this rhyme about with a bang, with a bang, with a bang, 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 expressed something that for her was extremely important. And so when she came, but it's within the confines of a rhyme. You're not asking her, tell me all the way you feel about something. She can just express her need to say those words by just saying the words. So you never know what a rhyme will do, right?
It's true. Yeah, we had Celia and I met a week or so ago to talk about today and what we would talk about, and Mariella was there as well. And you talked about your father, which I found. I don't know if you'd want to show the bumblebee.
Oh, sure, of course. Yes, well, because John Arnold then said about investigating rhymes that might have been used by people in his family, in times past, and also got other people to think about rhymes that were in their family. And my father had this rhyme, which, if any of you know it, it would be very interesting, because as far as I know, my father was the only person who knew it, but it's very short. It goes, bumblebee, bumblebee, come out of the barn with a bag of honey under each arm. Bzzz. And then, of course, you tickle the person. And the thing about it, if you have a child, especially a, 18-month-old or something that's wiggly, and you start saying this rhyme, bumblebee, they freeze. They stop wiggling because they know what's going to happen. Bumblebee, bumblebee, come out of the barn with a bag of honey under each arm, and then you tickle them a little bit. And the power of that rhyme, if you have a child, especially that age, and then older children, of course, like to do it to you. It's a two-way street. Rhymes are a two-way street. But has anybody ever heard that rhyme?
No.
No. So I don't know. My father lived in Alberta as a young person, so I like to think of it as an Alberta rhyme, but that may not be true. I don't know where it came from. But I was asking my sister, and that's the one she remembered. Another thing about rhymes with babies is that they very often have actions, maybe rocking or patting or something like that. And there's one, probably many of you know it, which is knock on the door, peek in, lift up the latch, walk in. And in my family, they did chin chopper, chin chopper, chin chopper, chin chin. And I didn't like that part because I didn't like somebody doing this. So when I started doing it with children in the Mother Goose program, I changed it to, knock on the door, peek in, lift up the latch, walk in. Let's go down cellar and eat apples. See, so you can make them into your own. They're not Shakespeare. You can do what you want with them. And I think that's part of their power.
Yeah, and you had said something interesting about your father had limited mobility.
Yes. Yeah, my father had a bone infection as a young person, so his leg was perfectly stiff like this. So lap things were not easy for him, but he could, this is the way the lady rides. Some of you must know that one. It's a very common one. This is the way the lady rides, trot, 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 trot. This is the way the gentleman rides, a gallop, a gallop, a gallop, a gallop. And this is the way the farmer rides. And see, my dad couldn't do hobbledy-hoy or whatever. No, so he would just kick you up in the air, hobbledy-hoy, hobbledy-hoy. So of course we loved it. So he adapted it to his, something that he could do. Yeah.
And one of the other things you said that I thought was interesting that I'd never thought about before, because I'm interested in nonsense, was that nonsense really only works well as in a rhythmical way or with rhyme, but prose nonsense really isn't that interesting. Like, it's sort of you need rhythm or rhyme to make it compelling or for it to work in some way.
Did I say that?
I think so.
Okay, well, it's certainly, if you want to remember it, I mean, one of the best things about rhymes, of course, is you remember them. And they have, well, they have rhyme for one thing, you know, they come, and then like several of the rhymes I've already said are really stories. And so the story part also holds you. So pure nonsense is harder because it doesn't have the same pattern and it, you know, it's nonsense. So how would you actually, but nonsense, some nonsense also makes sense in another way, don't you think? I mean, it's not, doesn't make logical sense. But even Humpty Dumpty is really nonsense. I mean, what is going on in that rhyme? You know? I can't explain it at all.
Remember how we talked about that nonsense can make sense out of life?
Well, I think, yeah, well, I think rhymes, even if they're nonsense, they have pattern. You know, they have either rhyme or rhythm or something. And so they do sort of make sense. I mean, they do say things, there is a pattern to things, and that will help you remember and help you know what's going to happen next, which I think is a big thing for children, about learning about life. You need to learn that if I do this, then that will probably happen, you know, that kind of thing. And rhymes are like that. They have that kind of a logic to them, even if they don't actually make kind of adult sense. Yeah. But you, I understand that you sort of set out to find out rhymes from different people you knew from different parts of the world and rhymes that had lived in their families. Is that true? Yeah.
Yeah, I got interested when I had children in, I guess, in how to play with them. I had really spent absolutely no time with children until I had children, and I would watch other people play with their kids, and I realized I had a lot to learn. And I love language, and you know, I think part of when you first learn language, I'm sure as a baby, when you're listening to people talk, most of it would seem like nonsense. I mean, your first experience of language would be that you're just listening to sounds that don't make any sense. And when you learn a new language, it's very much the same. You're just listening to the sentence melody and to the sounds. And so it may be one of the reasons why nonsense remains interesting, because it's one of the, I guess, would be one of the first experiences your mind has. But yeah, I wanted to learn how to play with babies, and so I got interested in, originally this book, which is but it's so silly, was supposed to be called Around the World by TTC, because my idea was I was going to interview people in different community centers and people who spoke different languages, and I was curious to hear the rhymes in the original language, but also to see if there's anything I could carry over into English, if the people I was listening to would help me translate them. But it was supposed to be like a 2-year project, and it took me about 10 years. And it ended up being more just meeting like people I met, chance encounters. And so it took me much longer and became a more amorphous sort of project.
Oh, sure. Yeah. And then someday you just had to stop, right? I mean, it's the kind of thing you can do endlessly, really, because you meet different people and they know different things. And I mean, one thing in the Mother Goose program, again, we've had sometimes programs with people from India, but they're not from the same part of India. So they don't know each other's rhymes. I mean, let alone that they come from other, you know, there are people from many parts of the world who come. And I think when people come from another country, especially with another language, of course, English rhymes don't make any sense at all if you're just learning a language. And so in the program, because we have the children there, the children understand, And so then the adults can begin to understand that this is what this rhyme means, even though in a certain way it's nonsense, but it does have some meaning in it. And then sometimes then the people from this part of India and that part of India can even exchange rhymes with each other. So, it's a big world of rhymes out there. And I think I hope everybody here, if you know a baby, that you will, or a 2-year-old or a 4-year-old or a 6-year-old, that you will use rhymes with them or tell them rhymes or get them to tell you rhymes, because that I think would be we don't want rhymes to become extinct, or to only live in books, We want them to be used with people. And so I really think it's up to everybody to do that, to use the rhymes. Yeah. Right. Why don't you tell us a rhyme can you remember one that you learned from somebody?
My dad had one, a very short one, that it's in the book, and he would just take any name, and so if it was Tim, it would be Tim, Flim, Tialago, Wim, T-legged, toe-legged, bow-legged, Tim. So that was one. The ones I remember best, I don't have the best memory, so I tend to remember the ones that are very short, like that, 2 lines.
That makes sense,
Which
yes.
is, yeah.
Well, I wonder where because I remember something about T-legged, tie-legged, bow-legged,
T-legged, toe-legged, bow-legged.
toe-legged, but yes, that pattern was in something that we used to say. I don't remember it.
Yeah, and it's funny, when you said the chin chopper one, I can
Uh-huh.
remember my dad saying chin chopper, but that's all I remember. I don't
Yeah.
remember the rest of.
Yeah.
And we talked too about the physicality,
Oh, yes.
like how almost every culture has a rhyme that involves like a little creature creeping
Yeah,
up
that's
the
right.
arm,
Yes. That's right.
or it's something that it has a little creature for each finger
Yes.
and toes.
Yes. Yes, I think in the Mother Goose we don't do toes too much because people are usually wearing shoes. but come a look a see, that's one. Here's my mama, come a look a see. Here's my papa. Here, come a look a see, my brother tall, sister, baby. We love them all. And I think there are many versions of that. Yeah.
My wife would do one that her mother would do, where each toe would get a different name. So like one would be the fire hydrant, one would be the astronaut, which it's not even a rhyme, but the kids love that one.
Well, that's how rhymes turn into stories, really. I mean, then you have all these characters on the end of your foot. and yeah, I think that's an interesting thing, is that some rhymes, a big part of them is the rhythm. And, there are lots of bouncing rhymes. From Wibbleton to Wobbleton is 15 miles. From Wobbleton to Wibbleton is 15 miles. From Wibbleton to Wobbleton, from Wobbleton to Wibbleton to Wobbleton is 15 miles. Yeah. Now, a friend of mine who was doing the program in Edmonton was doing it one day, and there was an older brother who was there, who was about 5, and he was playing off by himself. The babies were doing their things, but she could hear him saying something, and he was saying, from Edmonton to Wabbamum is 15 miles. From Edmonton to Wabbamum is 15 miles. And she said, you know that? She said, well, that's what my dad always says when he gets in the car. He says, well, it's going to be 50 miles. So he picked up from Wibbleton to Wobbleton and changed it to Edmonton to Wabbamum is 15 miles. So I think the kind of elasticity of these rhymes is part of what's wonderful about them, is that he could take that rhyme, make it into something that made sense to him, and be over there in the corner playing with his cars. He had little cars he was playing with while his baby brother was in the circle.
Yeah, I think you're right. That's one of the reasons a lot of them survive is because you can make a mistake, but the mistake becomes part of it just carries it on.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it doesn't stop you
Yeah.
in your tracks. Yes.
When I was doing the research, I'd always loved the song "The Fox Went Out on the Town One Night," and when I was researching it to see what the history of it was, I think originally they had thought it was probably 19th century, it was British. But then someone found a manuscript, I think from the 1600s, and they found out that the basic premise of the fox going to the town was the same, but the reason that the ending on like town o, town o, town o was because in Middle English, the final vowel was pronounced in words. Like now it's silent. And so that pattern had been a Middle English pattern, but then the song kept adapting to the English of the current time. So finally, the version that was the first version that they seemed to have for a long time was 150 years old. And that seemed reasonable, but then they were able to find this much, much older version without the intermediate versions. Like you could sort of see how it had happened, but
Yeah. Well, I think actually it's quite I don't know what the right word is, but to think of parents and babies and aunts, saying rhymes to children over centuries. I mean, I'm sure people have done it forever because when you have a baby, especially one that doesn't speak your language yet, then you need to say something to them. And the rhymes are something you can always say. So I'm sure, there's no way we can know, but I'm sure some of the rhymes that we know are things that have come down to us from the past. And what you did with talking to people from different parts of the world and what rhymes they had, I mean, it's hard sometimes to get them to, you can't translate them. I think that's one of the facts, really. You can take the same idea and make it into an English rhyme, but the way the language works, it isn't just, you can't just change it into another language. So maybe with babies, with little kids, who are, especially little kids who come from, whose people at home speak whatever language, and then they're hearing English, hearing rhymes in English gives them a sense of how English works, not just in terms of vocabulary, but sort of the way the rhythm is. And if they're going to be here where English is spoken, that may be a very positive thing for them. And then, of course, we can pick up things from anybody that we get a chance to pick things up from.
yeah, I once went to hear Stephen Sondheim speak when he came to Toronto. And one of the most interesting things for me that he talked about was how everything that's said is also really being sung. Like you could almost score any sentence that's being said. You could transfer it into notes.
Really? That's awesome.
Yeah. Which is, I guess, when you're listening to a language you don't know, that's what you're listening to.
That's right. That's for sure. Yeah. And when you're in a place where maybe in my case, English is spoken, but it's spoken with a different rhythm or a different lilt or whatever, then my family once spent 10 months in Yorkshire when I was an elderly age of 18, but my little sister was young, and she began speaking Yorkshire. She didn't know all the words, but she went to school with all the Yorkshire kids, and the older ones in the family, we didn't adapt that quickly, but we thought, where did this child come from, you know? Because she heard that, yeah. That's interesting that he would say that. I wonder if he goes around hearing people speak and hearing that, if that's just in him to hear that.
Yeah, it made me wonder about very successful songwriters, whether that's what they're hearing. And if you were able to listen to people that way, you would probably hear melody all the time, and you would pick out. It would be, it maybe not even fully conscious, but you would be picking up the interesting melodies and then translating them into song.
Well, is there anybody here who's a Francophone who speaks French really well? Because in doing things for the Mother Goose program, in French, they sing, I'm saying this, and if it's not true, somebody can tell me it's not true, but I believe that in French, children are sung to these kind of little verses more than in English. And when we were doing something multicultural, we were trying to find just plain rhymes in French, and people kept telling us the words of songs. So I don't know, nobody here is an authority on the French language, I guess, but or French as heard by babies. But I mean, that's a thing that if one were going to learn more about it, you could go listen to different, even if you didn't understand what the people were saying, you could hear what kind of voice they're using. Are they using a talking voice or a singing voice, you know, when they, because, I mean, if you get into lullabies, you're going into a whole other world, I guess you could say. But one thing we've done in the Mother Goose program, and it's actually happening more now, we have had some chance to work with people who work with deaf children, and doing rhymes not using spoken language but using signs, and also kind of acting out, you know. And I did some workshops with the people who work with the deaf children, and some of them were deaf and some of them were not, and we had translators there. But I just thought these people, they already know how to do rhymes because they're already using their hands and their faces, you know, and so their language is very expressive, and so to encourage this type of interaction with children, if the child is deaf or if the parent is deaf, it is really enriching, because then you're looking on it as a positive, you know. And so the people I was working with took rhymes that I gave them in English, and then they turned them into sign language rhymes. And now there's a woman here in Toronto who's come from Iran, and in Iran, she's a professor at a university, and she developed programs for families with deaf children based on the Mother Goose program. But in Iran, sign language is illegal. So they're not able to do them with sign language, but they do them with sort of acting out. Anyway, I've seen film of this, and the woman who's doing it she's starting to do it here in Toronto too. So rhymes, I would say one thing to remember about rhymes is they're not archaic and old. You know, they're alive, and people are working, you know, are doing new and creative things to bring rhymes to children and into families.
Yeah, when you were talking about working with deaf children, I was thinking again about our conversation from before, where we talked about, I mean, when you do these little rhymes with children, you're introducing them to so many things, like also to theater. And, you know, one of the first people I watched where I realized I had to learn more was a guy who had grown up in Brazil, and then I think, you know, mostly lived in France, but he had a very physical way of doing rhymes and playing with his children, I realized I wasn't that physical at all in the way I played. And then Mariella, you were saying you thought maybe in the Mediterranean, and maybe more in the Latin languages, there was a greater physicality to how you do the rhymes. And so it is an interesting cultural, like there are these cultural differences about what you're introducing a child to, what you're preparing them for. Even in the book I talk about meeting with a family from Chechnya where dance is very important. And they hadn't been in Canada for a long time, and we were talking about rhymes, and he was asking me about dancing, and I said, oh, I don't dance. And he couldn't believe that. He said, how do people know who you are if you don't dance? Because it was such an important cultural expression. That's part of the way you would know someone else was through their dance. And so for him, I'm sure I seemed like, there was a huge limitation on how I could be known.
Can you talk about the Maltese?
Oh, the Maltese, yeah. One of the people I interviewed is a very talented children's book writer, Christine Baldacchino. Some of you may know her book. Oh no, what's it called? I'm terrible with names. Morris Micklewhite. And so Christine's parents came from Malta, and she arranged that I could sit down with her parents and with her to talk, or with her dad, actually. And he told me about this tradition in Malta where I think it's men who do it, really, and they have singing insults. They sing insults back and forth, and you have to sing in a high-pitched voice, and it has to be witty. And he said they're the things, if you actually said these things to each other, you'd get a punch in the nose. But because it's being sung and you're singing in a high-pitched voice, it's okay. It's like a game almost. But it has to be witty and it has to rhyme. And he said it was based on washerwomen, like women washing clothes who would sing this way to each other. But it then was taken over by men. And it was fascinating, just that this was an important part of the cultural heritage. Christine had told me about it first, that she remembered this at Maltese picnics when she was little, the men doing these insult rhymes, but they're insult songs. And then he said, when it's over, you shake hands and laugh, and it's not, but you can be very rude when you're doing it. I'm not sure. He wrote one out for me, but I guess it would follow a pretty set pattern. I would guess like a set structure within which you could then improvise, and it would be not entertaining just for you, but for the other people listening.
Can you talk about Motherese?
Yeah, actually connected to that, Motherese, I guess you could define as a sing-song kind of voice you would use with a small child, with a baby. And it's often higher tone, and I had connected it to this Maltese tradition, I guess because maybe also the idea was if you were singing in this higher tone, it was less threatening. Yeah, I'm trying to think, there was somewhere else in the book I had connected it. But it was something that came up over and over, this different tone, like the manner of the language that you're using, or the manner of the expression. Which connects maybe to what you were talking about, if that's the case more in the French tradition. If you're singing, your voice would automatically, I think, become less threatening, more soothing. Like another parent of another children's book author. I don't know if any of you know Ruxana Khan.
Oh, I do, yeah.
And she actually grew up in the same town. She's about 6 years older than me, so we were at the same school at the same time, but never met each other. I mean, she would have been in grade 8 when I was in grade 1 or 2. And I liked one of her books a lot, I think The Big Red Lollipop. And I wrote to her, and then just by coincidence, it came up, we grew up in the same little town in Dundas, Ontario. So her mother still lived there, and I went to talk to her. And she pointed out something I hadn't thought about before, which was that when you're singing to a baby or soothing a baby, you're also soothing yourself, and which connects to motherese. When you speak in that way to a baby, sometimes when you're singing to a baby, you're very tired or frustrated, like the baby's been crying for a few hours. So it's not just the baby you're trying to soothe, but yourself. Which is something Ruxana's mother pointed out to me that I thought was interesting.
It is. I mean, that actually, of course, is true about rhymes and songs. They're useful as well as enriching and everything like that, and teaching language. But also with a child who isn't able to enter into a conversation with you. You have something to say to the child because you've got the rhyme, and then they can respond by giggling or wiggling their toes or whatever fits in with that rhyme, and then little by little they start being part of the conversation. But you're right about the tone of Motherese. I'm sure that's true. If you have a child who isn't sleeping, part of what you're doing is calming yourself down, and the to just know something in your head that you can just do that. You can just sing that song. You don't have to go read a book in order to sing it. You just already know to sing it. And then it can calm you down. And I'm sure every person here who has a child has had the experience of needing to distract a child sometime. And other than just saying, no, you can't do that. If you can say something else to them that will say, if you can say something, you can say, look, and at the bird, and then you have a rhyme about a bird you can say, or something like that, so that you're entering into another level of communication than just, please don't do what you're doing now. I think it's like that little boy who said from Edmonton to Wawa, he was entertaining himself. He was waiting for his baby brother. And so he was entertaining himself. And I always think back in the olden days when I used to take buses sometimes, I don't mean city buses, but, and if a child was being whiny or cranky, I used to think, oh, please, just sing him a song, or say a rhyme to him, because then, and if you start saying a rhyme, it's just like if I start telling you a story, you're going to start listening to me because you want to know the next thing that's going to happen in the story. And the same is true of rhymes. If you even if the child already knows the rhyme, they want to hear that again, So it's a very, I don't know, it's an amazing means of, you could say, control or getting a child to do what you want them to do. But if you, instead of saying, please, just be quiet now, if you can say, bumblebee, come out of the barn, and then the child will, look at you and wait for the next thing that's going to happen. So it's a very useful, as well as, of course, aesthetically pleasing thing to do.
And it's where nonsense can be helpful too. Because it doesn't, that same kind of, like if you're frustrated or just bored or the child is, nonsense gives you a lot of, any sort of entry point.
So you mean saying something nonsensical?
Saying something nonsensical or you could say, last night I thought I saw a second moon in the sky. Like maybe we should check and just that sort of thing. It doesn't have to make any sense at all, but it's a diversion.
Yep,
And again, not just for the child, but for you.
yes, for sure. Well, it makes you also look at the child in a different way. I mean, because you're thinking, okay, what will distract him? And also, sometimes it's surprising what children remember. If you start something you've done before and you just stop and they just keep going, then you know that they know it. And I do think, since this is a storytelling event, I think that the rhymes, children who hear rhymes they're really ready to hear stories because they know about pattern, and they know when you start something, it's going to have a pattern and it will get somewhere in the end. And I mean, rhymes mostly are nonsense. They're not logical stories because then they would not be so interesting. They have something fantastical in them, but they also have a pattern. And so I think children, we always think in the Mother Goose program, but if children come to our program and then go to kindergarten, they're better prepared because they've had this experience with language. And in many of our programs, many of the people who come don't have English as their primary language, but the children are going to have to go to school in English. So if they've had that experience hearing these little nonsensical but patterned stories, it's probably helpful to them when they get into a classroom. I think
Yeah,
that's
one of the interesting things I found, I once did an anthology. It was supposed to be children's poets from all across the English-speaking world. But it was interesting to see that most children's poets are not known outside of their own country. It's not something that often translates well, and in part because in English, what rhymes in England doesn't necessarily rhyme in Canada. And there's so many children's book authors, if you write prose, that does translate better. You can have a popular person in England and here, or in the States and here. But it's very rare for a children's poet to be known outside of their own country.
I was thinking about that for a little bit. Yes. Yeah, there was a Russian man named Tchaikovsky who was very, very interested in the language of children, and he wrote books about it. And I was telling them he lived just outside of Moscow, and this was in the Soviet era, so he was really a shining star, kind of, because he cared about children, but he cared to develop their imaginations, and he built this little kind of village for children to come and visit that had sort of nifty houses in it that they could go in and see what was inside and different interesting things to climb on. And while they did this, he studied their language. And of course, he was studying the Russian language. So the things he learned aren't particularly relevant because Russian has a completely different structure. And one thing, I did hear children in Russian on bus when I was there saying, be like the derivation of a noun or something, but saying it like a chant. And because Russian has a different kind of grammar than English. And sometimes the mother would be listening and then she would say, no, you got that one wrong, But it was sort of like a game. And Tchaikovsky, some of his work has been translated into English, but I looked at it and I thought, in a way, it really is about the Russian language. So I think that's a truth. But rhymes, we can sometimes get ideas from rhymes, and we did a book in the Mother Goose program. Sandra Carpenter Davis collected rhymes from people in different languages, and then we rendered them into English in a way that you can use them in English, so they weren't like literal translations. And and that would, so that we did do that because we thought people in Toronto should, oh, it's good to know that we all bring something like that to our city and to the culture of the children.
I think sorry, I just wanted to say, I think that John Arnold's book actually does that also in a huge way. So if you're interested in multilingual rhymes, check it out because he really includes so many of them, and he's actually even translated them. And so that was really interesting. Can you talk about your father and your brother when he went into, when he had his
Oh yeah, this was an interesting story in the book. My dad had a stroke about, it must be almost 20 years ago, and he lost his ability to speak when he had the stroke. It was about 12 hours, maybe the next day he still couldn't speak, and my brother came in from Montreal, so he wasn't there for the first day, but when he got there, when he got to the hospital room, he took my dad's hand and he started to sing A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Like just, he's an actor, so my brother is more likely, I think, to do that sort of thing. I wouldn't have thought to do it. But he sang A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, and then he went into, the three, what's the other one? There are three other songs that follow the same tune that are very basic. Baba Black Sheep. And so my dad started to sing along with him. And it was fascinating. And my dad said afterwards it was like he was at the bottom of a dark well and my brother had dropped a ladder down into the well and he could climb back on this scaffold. And it wasn't clear, I have no idea, like maybe my dad's speaking would have come back anyway. But it seemed in that moment, like my dad said his experience was this was exactly what he needed. Like he couldn't get back to language, but then dropping this ladder of A, B, C, D, E, F, G, the song brought it all back. And then after that he had no trouble. He was able to speak again. So yeah, it was fascinating. I don't know if it's the sort of thing you could study with people as a treatment, or it just happened to be exactly the right moment.
And Celia, the other thing you had said was about, the nervous system.
Oh,
Can you remember that part? Such an interesting idea.
okay, well, I'll say what I think, what I think. Yeah, well, I think that's true. The rhymes that are most common, almost the cultures I know about, which is not every culture, they have some kind of rhyme that involves going up the arm, and often it's about a mouse, that runs up the arm and hides in a little house here, and then there are all the finger wiggling ones and toe wiggling ones, and then that face one about knock on the door, peek in, lift up the latch, walk in, let's go down cellar and eat apples. I mean, all of those. A baby is sort of a blob. I mean, the baby has been in a womb surrounded by liquid and doesn't know it's out, doesn't know its shape or where its edges are and things like that. And so those kinds of rhymes and patterns that you do, and of course you do them over and over again. You never do rhymes just once. You do it, and once you find your child likes a certain rhyme, and this round and round the garden, like a teddy bear, 1 step, 2 step, tickle you under there. Every culture, I think, has some kind of rhyme like that, and you're right. They follow the shape of the body, and they tend to focus on hands, arms, and faces, and tummies, and then sometimes feet. But they really, I think, make a baby that's just left to lie and only is touched in order to be lifted. I'm not saying a neglected baby, but a baby who gets lifted up and held they're not getting any of that specific kind of touch. So I think it's probably extremely important and helps the child develop a sense of where they are and where their edges are, you know?
Yeah, you had talked about it following nerve patterns
Yeah.
often, like the actual nerve pattern.
I think they do. I mean, that's why they've survived. The rhymes have survived and continue to be strong. And I mean, and people still, buy books of nursery rhymes. And I don't think there's nothing on a screen that will replace being touched, And then for storytelling, the rhythm of the language, and then the idea that the rhyme has a shape, and often many rhymes have little stories in them. So I think it's a very good kind of beginning experience, and also the imagination that's in a rhyme. Even the nonsense rhymes, you're having to think, well, what is that really about, So I think we're lucky that we have them. That's what I think, and long may they live. That just do rhymes with children, and even if you know rhymes that you like them, you can even sometimes comfort yourself by saying a rhyme, because it sort of reminds you of where your boundaries are and all that kind of thing. Yeah, it's great to talk about them. They're not in my life as much as they were for many years, so it's a pleasure to me. And then that you went out and sought them. I was trying to think who in my family I could ask. Probably now there's nobody left that I could ask, but who would have known rhymes, So I won't answer that question because it's not very relevant, but you did make me think about that.
Tell us a poem, one of the rhymes that you adapted to a poem, and finish with that, please.
Oh. Well, my memory is terrible, so I'll see. And this is the problem for me anyway. I think for a lot of people that when you're not with children so much anymore, it doesn't get reinforced. Like in these large families where there would always be babies, it would be much easier to keep these things alive. But I'll read a very short one. This is this is one of the Sarandanes. These come from Mauritius. They're actually more like little riddles. But you get the answer with the riddle, which is kind of interesting. So this one's called I Break the Coffin. I break the coffin, I eat the dead. ? Peanut. So you picture the little peanut you open, and it's like a coffin with two little bodies inside. And these are given to children all the time. These very, very brief little images, but with a very poetic sort of introduction. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, we'll end there.
Thank you.
This is a topic that we could talk about for a very long time, and John Arnold Lawson's book is packed full with ideas and concepts that really study the subject, but it's only scraping at the surface of what's there and how this human heritage that is in every culture of rhymes is extremely powerful, and it helps us in maintaining our humanity in a much bigger way than we are ever going to be conscious of. Like we are not aware of it, but in fact that's what it does. And so I urge you to read the book and send questions to John Arno and to Celia, who knows so many rhymes and has done them so much and loves us so much. And I thank you on behalf of everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for being here.